Someone put your name on a form a few weeks ago. You barely noticed. A friend or a manager or someone from that community group you help out with more than you'd ever admit out loud, filled in a few boxes about something you did, sent it off to an address you didn't recognize, and told you about it afterward like it was a small, nice gesture that would go absolutely nowhere. Long shot, they probably said, or something close to it. Worth a try, though. You thanked them, mostly out of politeness, the way you thank someone for a lottery ticket you never asked for and don't expect to win. Forgot about it within the week. That's usually how these things go. A form gets filed, nothing happens, life continues exactly the way it was going to anyway. This time, something happened, not where you could see it. Several borders and an ocean away, in a wing of a very old building where the carpets are nicer than the news ever shows you and the actual work is far duller than anyone imagines. A young woman named Priya was 3 hours into a stack of nomination files that would put anyone to sleep by lunchtime. Her job, most days, has nothing to do with crowns or ceremonies. It's paperwork. Careful, unglamorous, faintly bureaucratic paperwork, the kind that keeps an institution like that one running long after the pageantry's been packed away for the day. Her specific task that week was building one-page summaries called briefs internally for a short list of ordinary people nominated for a small honor given out a few times a year to people who've quietly done something worth noticing in their own communities. Nothing that makes international news. The kind of recognition that means a great deal to the person receiving it and almost nothing to anyone reading about it afterward in a newspaper nobody keeps. Hundreds of names come through that process. Priya reads the nomination, checks a few basic facts, writes a clean, respectful paragraph, and moves to the next file. It is, by her own private admission to the two other people on her team, roughly as thrilling as filing taxes. She'd been at it since 8:30 that morning, and your file was somewhere past the 40th she'd opened. The office she shares with those two others is nothing like what anyone outside that building would picture. A radiator that clanks twice before it actually warms up. A window overlooking a service courtyard instead of any of the gardens the postcards make so much of. A colleague named Desmond who has worked in the honors office for 19 years and treats every 40th file the way you'd treat the 40th item on a grocery list, with the specific practiced numbness of someone who long ago ran out of ways to find paperwork moving. He'd looked up from his own stack around 11 that morning and asked, without much hope of an interesting answer, whether she'd found anything good yet. A man who rescued a neighbor's dog from a drainage ditch, she'd said. Twice, apparently. Same dog. Desmond had nodded like that tracked and gone back to his own pile. That was the general emotional temperature of the room. Competent, dry, entirely unprepared for what was about to happen in it. She almost wrote your summary the same way she'd written the other 39. Started to, actually 2 sentences in, competent and forgettable, the kind of paragraph that exists purely to move a name from one stack to another. And then the system did something it does maybe a handful of times a year. A small icon appeared next to your file, a cross-reference flag, which meant somewhere else in an entirely different filing system, one that has nothing to do with honors or nominations, your name already existed. Priya has worked there long enough to know what that usually means. 9 times out of 10, it's nothing. A distant relative who once wrote in about something unrelated, a coincidence of surnames. She clicked it anyway, mostly out of habit, expecting to close it within 30 seconds and get back to the stack. It pulled up a letter. Not the kind of letter most people picture when they imagine royal correspondence, the requests and the well wishes and the occasional strange handwritten theory about the state of the nation. This was from the General Public Correspondence Archive, the enormous, quietly maintained record of the tens of thousands of letters that arrive at that address every single year, the overwhelming majority of which receive a polite standard reply and are filed away, unread by anyone more senior than the correspondence team itself. This one had a different kind of tag on it. A flag reserved for letters that were actually read further up the chain. Priya had seen maybe a dozen of those flags in 3 years of working there. She opened it. It had been written 8 months earlier by someone Priya had never heard of, and you may not think about often either. A woman, judging by the letter, who'd once been a stranger to you, met briefly, under circumstances the letter described in more detail than most people would bother writing down. Her car had broken down on a stretch of road with no shoulder to speak of, well past midnight, in weather bad enough that she'd started, by her own account, to genuinely worry about what would happen if nobody stopped. Plenty of headlights had passed. Yours were the ones that slowed down, then stopped, then reversed a good 100 feet back to where she was standing with a phone that had died an hour earlier and no clear plan beyond waiting. She wrote that you didn't ask her much, didn't need the whole story. Just got out into weather you clearly had no interest in standing around in, looked at the situation for about 10 seconds, and told her you'd wait with her until someone she trusted could actually get there, because you weren't about to leave her alone on a road like that no matter how long it took. It took considerably longer than either of you expected. She described sitting in your car for the better part of 2 hours, 2 strangers who would never see each other again, talking about nothing in particular to keep her mind off how frightened she'd been 20 minutes earlier, before her ride finally arrived. She said you never once made it seem like an inconvenience, never checked the time in a way that made her feel like a burden. Never once asked for so much as her name until she offered it on her own near the end. She described a night that had gone badly for her, the specifics of which the letter kept vague on purpose in places, the way people do when the details still cost something to revisit even in writing. And she described you, not by any grand title, not as anyone remarkable in the way the word usually gets used, just as the person who happened to be there, who didn't have to stay, who stayed anyway, who did something small and unglamorous and completely without an audience that this stranger had apparently never stopped thinking about since. She hadn't written to ask for anything. That was the part that had apparently caught someone's attention enough to flag it. Most letters that reach that address, even the kind ones, tend to circle eventually toward a request, an invitation, a favor. Hers didn't. She'd written, near the end, that she simply didn't know who else deserved to hear that a good person still existed in the world, and that if an institution like that one was in any position to notice good people, she wanted this one noticed, even if nothing ever came of the letter at all. Priya read it twice. Then, quietly, she read it a third time, and this time she turned her monitor a few inches so Desmond could see it too without her having to explain why. He read it standing behind her chair, arms crossed, the posture of a man who does not get moved by paperwork on principle. He didn't say anything when he finished, just exhaled through his nose once and said, 19 years. Which didn't mean anything to Priya until he added, 19 years I've been reading nomination files in this office, and that's maybe the fourth one that's actually done that to me. He didn't specify what that was. He didn't need to. Priya did what she's been trained to do when a file crosses a certain threshold of significance. She didn't finish your honors summary herself. She printed both documents, the nomination and the letter, and walked them down 2 corridors to the office of a man who has worked in that household in one capacity or another for almost 30 years, the kind of senior aide whose title is longer than most people's job descriptions, and whose actual function, most days, is deciding what's worth someone more senior's limited attention. His name, for what it's worth, is Mr. Whitfield, though almost nobody below a certain rank calls him that to his face. He's not an easy man to surprise. 30 years in that building tends to remove most of a person's capacity for it. He read the nomination first, the way he reads everything, quickly and without much visible reaction. Then he turned to the letter. Priya says she watched something shift in his face about 4 lines in. Not dramatic, he's not a dramatic man, but something in the way he sat forward, just slightly, the way a person does when a piece of paper has just answered a question that's been sitting unresolved in the back of their mind for the better part of a year. He looked up. Not at the letter, at the name typed at the top of the honors nomination beside it. Is this the one we were briefed on? He asked. Priya didn't know what he meant. She hadn't been in the building long enough to know, so he told her. 8 months ago, on a Wednesday he remembers more specifically than he'd admit to most people. That letter had been one of a small handful pulled out for the weekly correspondence summary, the short list of items considered worth a few minutes of a much busier person's time. It was read in a room with better light than his own office, at a table designed for meetings that ran shorter than most of the meetings actually held there, to an audience of exactly 1 principal and 2 aides, himself included. Most weeks the summary gets a nod and moves on to the next item on a list that never gets any shorter. That particular week, apparently, it didn't. The letter had been read aloud, in full, not the abbreviated version his junior staff typically prepare, because something about the handwriting or the phrasing had made the reader decide it deserved to be heard exactly as written. He remembers watching the room go quiet the way rooms occasionally do, not from awkwardness, from attention. He remembers the principal setting down a pen that had been tapping absently against the edge of the table for most of the meeting and not picking it back up again until the letter was finished. And at the end of it, that person had asked, simply, whether anyone knew what had become of the person the letter described. Whether there was any way to find out, whether whoever this was, someone might look into it. There wasn't, not really. The letter hadn't included your full name, only what the writer knew of you, a first name and a rough description and a location vague enough to be useless for anything official. Mr. Whitfield had made a note of it anyway, the way he makes notes of the handful of things each year that don't resolve cleanly, and moved on, the way you have to when a building receives that much correspondence and only so many hours exist in which to answer it. He remembers thinking at the time that it was the kind of thread that simply doesn't tie off. Most of them don't. You learn to make peace with that in that job, or the job makes you miserable within a year. The note had sat unresolved for 8 months, until a woman 3 corridors away opened a nomination file that afternoon, and a small cross-reference icon did something it does only a handful of times a year. "Print both," Mr. Whitfield said. "Properly this time, not the summary version." Which meant something specific in that building. It meant the file was no longer moving through the ordinary channel toward a routine honor considered a few times a year among a short list nobody outside that process ever hears about. It meant somebody with the authority to do so had decided this particular file deserved to be seen by the person who'd asked the original question 8 months earlier, in full, with nothing softened or summarized out of it. He didn't send it through the usual internal system, the one that routes documents through 4 separate approvals before anything reaches a principal's desk. He walked it himself, down a corridor Priya had only ever seen the far end of, past a security desk that nodded him through without needing to check anything, and handed it personally to someone whose job, among other things, is deciding what actually makes it onto a very short daily list of items requiring personal attention. That's not a courtesy Mr. Whitfield extends often. In 19 years working 2 doors down from him, Desmond could count on one hand the number of times he'd seen it happen. It might not go anywhere, Whitfield told Priya honestly, on his way back through the office to collect his coat. 6 o'clock had come and gone without either of them noticing. That's not me being discouraging. That's just how this works. There's no promise attached to any of it, and there never was, even 8 months ago. But it deserved to be put back in front of the person who asked the question in the first place, rather than sitting in a drawer because nobody happened to notice the coincidence. That's really all today was. Somebody noticing. There's a version of this story where nothing more happens for a while. Institutions move slowly, deliberately, and there's no guarantee attached to any of this, no promise of what comes next, if anything does. That's not really the point, and it was never the point of the letter either. The woman who wrote it never asked for a single thing to come of it. She just wanted it known, somewhere, by someone, that you existed and that what you did mattered, even if the only outcome was a piece of paper being read once, by one person, in one room, and then filed. It was read by more than one person. It was remembered for 8 months by someone whose days are, by any reasonable measure, extremely full of things far more urgent than a stranger's kindness on an unremarkable night. And it was found again, entirely by accident, by a woman doing tax return adjacent paperwork on an unremarkable Tuesday, because 2 systems that were never designed to speak to each other happened to share one detail in common. Your name. Here's what's true. Wherever you're sitting right now, almost certainly with no memory of the specific night that letter describes in such detail. Because the nights that matter most to other people are so often the ones we barely register ourselves. You might not even place it right away. A stranded car. A stranger in the rain. There have perhaps been a few nights like that in your life, and you've likely filed all of them the same way, as nothing, as just what you'd hope anyone would do. You didn't do what you did for this. You couldn't have. You had no way of knowing a stranger would go home and sit with it long enough to eventually put it into words. No way of knowing those words would travel further than either of you could have reasonably guessed, into a building neither of you will likely ever set foot in, into a filing system that, purely by chance, happened to intersect with an entirely unrelated form someone else filled out on your behalf months later. You were never trying to be noticed. That's precisely why you were. Somewhere, right now, a folder with your name on it is sitting on a desk that ordinarily holds far weightier matters than a nomination for a small community honor, not because of the honor, because of what came attached to it, unplanned, unpursued, entirely outside your control or awareness. A door that opened by accident and stayed open for 8 months, waiting for exactly this kind of coincidence to walk back through it. Back in that cramped office with the clanking radiator, Desmond went back to his own stack once Priya and Whitfield had gone, dog rescue nominations and school fundraiser nominations and all the rest of it, the ordinary, worthy, forgettable business of the day. But he mentioned it to his wife that night anyway, which he almost never does about work, that a letter he'd read 19 years into a job he'd long stopped expecting to surprise him had, for about 4 lines, genuinely surprised him again. You may never hear another word about any of it. That's genuinely how most of these threads end, quietly, without follow-up, filed and closed. But for 8 months, somewhere far from anywhere you've ever been, a good thing you did on an ordinary night, for no audience and no reward, was sitting in a drawer, unresolved, because it mattered enough to someone that they refused to let it simply disappear. It didn't disappear. It found its way back to you, through a route nobody designed, on a Tuesday nobody will remember for any other reason, because some things you do quietly enough end up traveling further than you'll ever be told.